Chapter 7 The Spring in the Woods. Saturday afternoons and Sundays were the best part of the whole week for Kay and Gentian, for their mother was at home then, and could go on walks with them and tell them stories. The walks were usually out across the meadows that lay behind the little brown house toward the woods and the purple mountains. They never could reach the mountains in just an afternoon's walk, of course, but they liked even going toward them, and on those days when they walked rather fast and did not ask for too many stories by the way, they did reach the woods. Deetra made up the stories during the week while she worked at her machine in the roaring factory. That was odd, for these stories were all about the woods and fields and streams and the people unseen by mortals who dwell in them. Those were the stories she made up, but there were others about great men of distant times and faraway countries, and added to these were the myths of their own land, the land they had perhaps left behind them forever. The children liked the myths the best. Between the stories they would talk together about Hazar, the father who had lost them, and was now hunting them over the world. Indeed, Deetra talked about him so much, and kept him so alive in the children's minds, that forever after, when they remembered those Saturday afternoons, it seemed as though their father had been with them on the walks. Today, there were no stories. The children were too full of their adventures in the clear land to talk about anything else, and besides, Nan was with them. Deetra had helped with the dishes so that she might come, for Deetra knew from the very first that Nan would be at home in the fields, walking toward the mountains. She was rather like one of those tranquil people that moved through Deetra's dreams while she sat or stood in front of her machine in the roaring factory. She thought it more and more while she listened to Nan's voice answering the children, and saw her short curls blown about in the sun. But Deetra hardly listened to what the three were saying, for it was all talk of the clear land, and Deetra still had an idea that must be a game Nan was playing with the children, so she did not interrupt them, but thought her own thoughts instead. They were thoughts of Hazar. Would he ever find them? And so, thinking her own thoughts, Deetra gradually fell behind. Her children and Nan were talking as though they meant to reach the mountains. Indeed, half the time they did not walk at all, but ran and danced as children run and dance in the clear land. At last the three came to the spring in the wood. There it lay, cupped deep in green and silvery moss. "See," whispered Gentian, "when you look deep down into it, bending close above, it is like the shoeman's window, only with bright pebbles instead of a silver sandal away off down there." Nan stretched herself out on the silvery moss, and looked down long into the crystal water. "It is like the window, isn't it?" Kay asked. "And it's like the air around the clear land too, once you think of it." "Yes, it is like both," Nan agreed. Gentian pulled at Nan's wood-brown frock. "Do you think, Nan, we might get through into the clear land by way of this spring?" Nan sat up. "Yes, I think you might, but it would be harder getting back this way once you had gone. If I were you, I would not hurry things, but wait until the clear land showed itself to me again without my trying." Gentian now stretched herself out on the moss and looked down into the clear water as Nan had done before, her face quite close. Nan and Kay wandered off to look and listen for birds. Kay knew rather a lot about birds, and was forever adding to his knowledge. It was a proud time for him now, when he could display his lore before Nan, who listened so quietly and was such a splendid companion. Gentian hardly knew they had gone. She was gazing at the shining, smooth, many-colored pebbles down at the bottom of the water. They were pink and purple, blue, green, and white, but besides these fascinating colored ones, there were many uninteresting gray ones. They were uninteresting only at first glance. However, for almost at once, Gentian found that it was the gray pebbles she looked at most. She saw now that they were dove gray and worn so smooth, so smooth. Then the longer she looked, the more surely she saw that the gray was just a mask for other color, not pink and purple, blue, green, and white, but all those mingled. The smooth gray pebbles, now to Gentian's eyes, were pieces of rainbow. Then her gaze drifted to the center of the spring, where the crystal water, pure and clear and cold, welled up from under a ledge of gray rock, a rainbow rock. As Gentian looked, her heart beat fast and her lips smiled, for she was learning the secret of the rock. What that secret was I cannot tell you, for Gentian says it is not a secret in words. You must just know it without words. That is all. Kay and Nan by this time had wandered beyond her hearing, and the birds that had flown away when the three had come to the spring now returned. Gentian heard them singing above her, one little yellow throat, fairy-like behind his black mask that had nothing frightening about it, came and perched on a young birch shoot just at her shoulder. There he sang his witchery, 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 over and over. His mate was there too, without any mask. They never minded Gentian, for she was lying so still. Perhaps they thought she was just part of the wood. But a strange thing was happening to Gentian now. In spite of all her stillness, she was looking down through the crystal spring into the clear land. But the clear land is up, not down, you cry. Yes, of course. Well, Gentian was looking up through, looking down. That is all it can be done. She was seeing into the clear land as through a window pane. The window pane was the crystal spring, but she would never have known it was the clear land, and not just a reflection of the wood where she lay, had it not been for the crystal light, for she was looking into another beach. Wood, and there was a spring that cupped in silvery and green moss. It was the other spring, of course, the spring that overhung this one where she was really lying. So far, this other place was the same as that place where she lay, save for the crystal light. But there were two people by that other spring, the wind boy and her mother. Yes, there was Dietra in the clear land, sitting back on her heels at one side of the spring, and there was the wind boy on the opposite side, lying moody and silent, staring into the water. Gentian had never seen her mother like this. Her face was so shining and carefree, but that was not it. There is no way to tell you, but she was rather like a larger, clear child. Gentian was still for a while with wonder, but then she cried, "Mother!" At her cry, the yellow throat perched on the young birch shoot at her shoulder dropped his song in the middle and, startled, flew away. But Dietra did not turn her eyes to Gentian, for Gentian was only seeing through into the clear land. She was not in it herself, and there was no way for Dietra to see or hear her. No, instead of turning it at Gentian's cry, Dietra smilingly spoke across to the wind boy. Gentian heard not a word of what she said, nor the wind boy's reply, but she could see that the wind boy brightened up as he answered, and for the moment forgot his moodiness. And in that moment Dietra worked quickly with her strong, beautiful fingers on the little image of the wind boy that was standing upright in the moss before her. She was trying to catch the changed look in the plastilina, but Dietra had not had the statuette when they all came across the meadows together. Gentian was sure of that. How was it there with her now, then, and how had she found her way through to the clear land? Mother, Gentian cried again, and at that second cry the birds that had alighted farther off than the yellow throat, and had not been disturbed by the first cry, stopped their songs too and flew away. Gentian was left alone in the silent wood, and Dietra, seen through the crystal water, did not turn her eyes toward the cry. She only went on working at the plastilina with swift, sure fingers and talking to the wind boy. Gentian saw her lips moving. Gentian was frightened now. She reached toward her mother. At the instant of her gesture, the spring was a window no longer. It had become just a spring, and Gentian's arms were in the water. The other spring was gone, the wind boy and her mother. She stood up then and looked all about her in the wood. How silent! Not even the sound of wings stirring amid leaves. She called, "Kay, Kay, Nan, hello, where are you gone to?" Nan at the very top of her voice. "Who?" from a long way off through the trees. It was Kay's reassuring voice, and then came "Who?" That was Nan, clearer and higher, like a bird call. Gentian fled from the still spring and ran toward the voices. She met Kay and Nan in a meadow of bracken in a little ravine. "What is the matter, Gentian?" Nan asked the minute she saw Gentian's face. "What has happened?" But Gentian could only say, "Where is mother? I want my mother." "Why, we left her at the edge of the woods, hunting violets. You know that. It is not far away." "Oh, do you think she will truly be there in the sunshine, just hunting violets?" "Do you think so, Nan?" "Yes, why not?" But Gentian found no words for the sadness and trouble of her heart. If you had seen your mother so near and called to her, and she could not hear or see you, I think you would have felt the same. "Oh, let us hurry then and find her. Hurry." So the three ran away through the bracken to the edge of the woods, and there, standing and looking about, they at first saw no Dietra. Gentian was about to call mother in a much louder and wilder way than she had called at the spring, but the call stopped at her lips, for there, just in front of them, down in the grass, a large bunch of gathered violets beside her, lay Dietra, sound asleep in the sunshine. Kay thought, "How tired and pale she looks. Oh, why can't I go to work in that roaring factory and let her stay at home?" Nan thought the sun and the meadow were just what she needed. But Gentian thought nothing at all. She flung herself upon her mother with a dozen kisses. Dietra sat up, surprised, out of sleep, drawing the back of her hand across her eyes. Her dark hair came slipping and sliding down around her shoulders as the pins loosened. Kay found them for her, quickly searching in the long grass. Then, still sitting there in the sunny grass that came almost up to her shoulders, Dietra wound up her smooth hair and pinned it high into place. Her eyes were clear with sleep, and her lips smiling. Gentian thought, "Why, she looks almost the way she looked at the spring in the clear land. But where is the statuette?" Dietra, glancing up at her little girl, caught the happy light in her eyes. "What is it, Gentian?" she asked. But Gentian only asked, "Did you have a dream, mother, while you slept here? Were you perhaps dreaming?" "No," Dietra shook her head, quite certain. "No, no, no dreams at all. Just deep, deep sleep." And Dietra was right. She had had no dreams at all, only the best sort of sleep there is, out there in the sunshine. Then they went home across the meadows, only this time Gentian stayed back with her mother and carried the violets loosely in her skirt, not to crush them. Nan and Kay went on ahead and were home well ahead of them, getting supper ready, but Gentian never told her mother how she had seen her through the crystal spring. It was something more to wonder about than speak of. Chapter 8. Through Music. That night Dietra brought out the wind boy and worked on his mouth, trying to make it smile as it should, a clear land smile, but she sighed often, for in spite of her long sleep and rest in the meadow grass that afternoon, she was not succeeding. Gentian heard her mother's sigh. "Just wait, mother darling," she said. "When Kay and I have caught the masker and got the mask, you can get the wind boy right, for then he will be happy. He will be as happy and clear-eyed and smiling as the other clear children. Only wait for that, mother." Dietra drew the back of her hand across her eyes. "Perhaps," she said, "but you must try hard to help him toward happiness. Children, for until he is happy and carefree, how can I make him so?" But then she shook herself, as though from a dream, and pushed the statuette away from her, away to the opposite side of the table, laughing, and stood up, stretching her arms out sleepily. "Come, children," she said, "I am half asleep already and dreaming. I forgot it was only a game, all your talk about the wind boy. It's your bedtime, and I'm going too. It's that long walk and all the fresh air. How pleasant it was to have mother going up the stairs with them, and to bed at the same time. Oh, they wished that every Saturday they might go so far that this would happen. But Nan, in spite of the walk, was neither tired nor sleepy. When the dishes were done, and the floor brushed up, and the milk bottles put out at the back door, she blew out the lamp in the kitchen and went out to sit on the doorstep in the spring starlight. And as she sat there, her head back against the door post, her eyes half shut, a sudden breath of sweet wind came down to her out of the cherry tree. She lifted her eyes as though the sweet wind had spoken to her. There was a parting in the high flowery branches, and out through it, from his secret place of watching, came the wind boy into the evening air. Softly and lightly, on half-spread wings, he drifted down and stood by Nan on the doorstep. She moved to one side to make room for him. "I've been up there all evening watching for that old masker," he told her, "but it never came at all tonight. And now it won't, I suppose, for it's long past twilight. It's no use." "Don't give up," Nan said softly, so as not to waken the sleepers in the house. "Other twilights are coming." "And in one of them you will surely get back your mask." The wind boy grew silent. Nan did not look at him, and grew silent too, for she knew that more than he had told her was bothering him. She was sorry, but until he should speak, she did not know how to comfort him. After many minutes he leaned toward her, putting his hand on her knee. He said, turning his head away, "That little girl asleep up in the house there promised to help me. So that was it. She will help you, and Kay will help too. They both mean to, but tonight they were sleepy from their long walk. And besides, this is their Mother's Day. But when next the masker comes wandering around in the twilight, be sure Kay and Gentian will be ready." The wind boy raised his head up at that and Nan saw that he was cheerful again. That is as cheerful as he could well be, while he was shut away from his clear land playmates, and must go without his silver sandals. After that they said no more, but stayed silent and still as the starlight in friendly company. It was late in the evening that the policeman, on his final rounds, and taking a last look about for the masker, stopped at the little swinging gate to look hard at Dietra's doorstep. It almost seems as though there's somebody here, he whispered to himself, but when he had leaned over the gate and looked longer, he shook his head. Just starlight glimmering on the stone. He smiled to himself. I'm beginning to see people in mere starlight. Well, that's no worse than seeing mountains in a girl's eyes. What's coming over me? Puzzling about the odd tricks he was beginning to play on himself, he moved away toward his home and his bed. Then came Sunday morning. As always on Sunday, Dietra took her children to the village church. Now these children were almost as bewildered in church as in school, and more ill at ease. Partly this was because of their clothes. To church they must wear the same faded blue that they wore to school, and all the other children who came to church with their mothers and fathers were dressed in best clothes. Gentian and Kay felt that they were well stared at for daring to go to church in their evening garments. But their greatest bother was Dietra. She was truly beautiful, their mother, but no one in church could know it, for there she was in her dark cape, the cape she wore to the factory every day, and that the children hated. It covered her from head to her heels, but that was just as well, for under it was only the old black smock dress that she wore daily. Dietra, it is true, had embroidered a bright bunch of buttercups on both pockets, and that made it gayer. But the dress was too shabby, in spite of the buttercups, to show at church. And then she had covered her smooth dark hair that looked so beautiful, wound high on her head with a dull-colored scarf. Y.K. said to himself now, for the 100th time as they walked along toward church, it's just as though Mother were a candle, only all snuffed out by these horrid clothes. But the children had never told their mother how they felt about church, and if she guessed, she never told them that she guessed. The village church was white with a white high steeple. It stood at the top of a little hill over the town. Today, when the children and their mother reached the hill, they saw that it must be later than they had thought, for there was no one on the sidewalk at all, walking up toward the church. They hurried their pace, and when they reached the door, they heard the music of the first hymn. It floated out to them through the open windows. Oh, this would be worse than ever, going in when everyone was before them and the service began. But when they had reached their own places, Kay's heart suddenly glowed, for Rosemary was there. She stood in her grandfather's pew beside Miss Prine. She was all in white today, with soft hem-stitched ruffles at the neck and wrist. Her dancing dark curls were lost under a wide white leghorn hat with a wreath of daisies, buttercups, and bachelor buttons around the brim. But she could not smile at Kay, the smile that said so much, for her pew was way down in front, and Kay could only see her back and now and then the side of her cheek. This was just a little village church, and so there was no pipe organ to comfort the refugees' hearts with its noble, swelling tones. There was just a little parlor organ, and Miss Todd, their schoolteacher, was playing it today instead of the regular organist. "Miss Todd looks different somehow, doesn't she?" Gentian whispered to Kay while Dietra was finding the place in the hymn book. Kay stopped looking at Rosemarie's back and saw that it was true. Miss Todd's church expression was very different from her school expression. "School puts her out, I guess, the way Mother's clothes put her out," Kay whispered back, and Gentian nodded, for she and Kay understood each other very well, even when queer things like that were said that most people wouldn't understand exactly. At school, Miss Todd was very brisk and ready. Here in church, playing the little parlor organ, she was neither brisk nor ready, but she was ever so much more alive. The children noticed it even more later when she played while the collection was being taken up. Miss Todd looked as though she had forgotten the congregation then, and even the choir. She was thinking only about the music and what it meant, and suddenly, as Kay and Gentian watched her, they began to hear the real music, the high, noble pipe organ tones the composer had heard when he wrote the score. This new, rich music carried them away, and they did not think to be startled. It carried them away into church in the clear land. At least they thought it was church, for there were the clear children they had played with yesterday sitting in a large half-circle. Where were they sitting? On a crescent-shaped bench. Kay and Gentian could not be sure, for they only glimpsed them for a second. Their colored tunics and gleaming sandals and the opal-shaded wings of some made the half-circle seem a rainbow arc dropped upon the grass. Why the children thought this was church was because of the rapt, uplifted faces of the clear children, and the music, oh more splendid and holy than any pipe organ music, that filled the air. Gentian looked toward Kay quickly to see whether he was through into the clear land with her, but how she knew where to look, that would be hard to say, for he was sitting on the bench at the very opposite end, at the tip of the crescent. All the clear children were between them. He was looking toward Gentian across the crescent too, and their eyes met for an instant. Then they smiled, for they were glad they had both got through together. But the music, the whole sky was throbbing with this great music, and in the instant that the eyes of the brother and sister met, the music dropped crystal curtains between them. They could not see each other now, or any of the clear children. Kay and Gentian each sat alone and looked out into what? I cannot say. Kay thought afterwards it was the ocean stretching away forever, as far as his sight could reach, but Gentian was sure it was the sky, that she was looking out through the sky forever and ever. But whichever it was, the crystal clearness of the air made it possible for the eyes of the children to see a much greater distance than they ever could down here in this denser air. And while they looked out into infinity, the organ rolled. It shook their very hearts, and then it grew still. But when the organ was stilled, the infinite blue that surrounded the children took up the music, not in their ears, but in their hearts. No matter how long Kay and Gentian live here on this earth, they will never forget that instant of church in the clear land. But it could be only an instant, because the deacon, passing the plate for the collection down in the village church, called them back. Perhaps the eyes of the congregation, following the deacon in his plate passing, helped too in calling them back, for all the people who sat behind them or beside them knew it was their turn to put in their pennies, and expected them to do it. So the children came rushing back from the clear land, and gave their mite to the collection. They could hardly at first believe that they were back in the village church again. But there was Miss Todd still playing at the little parlor organ, her face alive, and there was Rose-Marie down in front with the bright wreath around her leghorn hat, and there was their mother beside Gentian, but with the faraway look in her eyes that the children very well knew meant she was thinking about Hazar, their father. And hadn't they just dropped their pennies into the bronze plate? Oh yes, this was real enough. They had heard the pennies ring a little on the metal. Things in a dream don't ring like that. But even so, it was hard for the children to believe that the village church was real. So suddenly they had come back into it, and so shadowy for a while it had seemed. As they were walking home, one on each side of Dietra, Kay said across to Gentian thoughtfully, "I don't think I shall ever mind having to go to church in old clothes again. It doesn't seem to matter any more." Gentian had been thinking the same thing. She wanted to tell Kay so, and to say that now, all because of that instant of church in the clear land, she was seeing everything that touched her little life in proportion. But she had no words for this, and so she was silent, thinking. In the afternoon they sat in the shade of the cherry tree, while Nan read aloud from one of their favorite books, and Dietra rested upstairs on her bed. Toward twilight the first thunder shower came up. It began with a low rumble away off somewhere beyond the purple mountains. "Oh dear," Kay muttered. "If it rains, the masker won't be out. I hope it doesn't rain till dark." "I thought you didn't like the masker coming around," Nan smiled. "Oh, but you see we're going to catch it. We're going to catch it and get the mask away for the Wind Boy." "Everything is different now," said Kay, but their fears were justified. By twilight, great sheets of warm spring rain were driving across the little garden, and the children were inside, kneeling on the bench, looking out disappointedly into the growing dark. "Well, there's tomorrow night," Nan comforted them. Yes, but before tomorrow's twilight could come they must go to school, for tomorrow was Monday, and the children were in the habit of dreading Mondays as they looked forward to Saturdays. They were, you see, already forgetting a little the new sense of proportion they had discovered in church that morning. But though tomorrow was Monday, it was to be quite different from any other Monday. You shall hear about it.